Okay, so we have a wall repair we have to do today, and the walls are a little challenging. There's a texture on the wall that we have to try to match, which is typically difficult, but we're gonna do our best. We have an idea. I wanna fast track this job, so I'm gonna use DRYWALL 20, and we're gonna dry it quickly with a hair dryer. But first I wanna assess exactly how extensive this repair is gonna be. Now I can feel this right here, and there's a bubble there, which means there's some compromise. So I'm going to take a 5-way and I'm going to dig into that. So as you can see, it's getting extensive. So I just want to make sure I take the loose stuff off, and I don't want to get buried here. So I don't want to spend too much time. I'm going to use DuraBond to take that to patch it. But as you can see, it's starting to create a little bit of a problem here. I want to make sure that I get the loose stuff off, okay, because if you don't, you're going to have the same issue, and it looks like I'm going to have a lot of fun on this patch. Well, that got pretty big on me, didn't it? And I'm not done. So I'm going to have to take that off at this point now. See that? Okay, so that grew exponentially, but I still have my plan to fix it and repair it, and I think I'm done. A little more here. So I'll get that taken off. We'll clean up around the box. Get all of that cleaned up there. Just make sure. I'd rather take a little more off than have a problem after I'm done patching. At this point, a little more doesn't really hurt, does it? Oh. Okay, so I think I'm done with the prep here. So I'm going to do something I wasn't planning on doing. I'm going to put a little mesh around these spots here, and then I'm going to DuraBond all of that. And actually, I'm not sure. That's just the paint coming off there. Is all that really is. It's the plaster is fine underneath it. It's just really the paint that we're having an issue with. So, somehow it didn't adhere correctly. So, but we're going to fix that. So, let me go get my tape, and we're going to start mixing DuraBond, and we're going to start working on this patch. All right, so what I've decided to do here is I'm going to put mesh tape along the edge of all of this paint. It's pretty stable. I decided I'm not going to go any further because this isn't bubbling up. It's okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my mesh tape and I'm gonna use a pair of scissors, and I wanna use a utility knife against the wall. I don't wanna score the wall, but I do wanna cut my mesh tape. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put that up here just like that, and I'm gonna use my scissors to cut through the middle of this. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want that full piece of mesh on the edge. I just need a little bit to hide that edge and adhere that to the wall. So I'm just gonna take my scissors and cut right up through the middle or close to it. It doesn't need to be exactly in the middle. Okay, and I'm gonna put that over there. Okay, so now I'm just gonna cut little pieces. Okay, and I'm gonna use my scissors, which help avoid fray on my fiberglass mesh. And I'm just gonna lightly adhere that to the wall. Now sometimes it has a hard time sticking, and that is true. If it does, then I'll deal with that in another portion of this video, how I handle that. I may have to put a little bit of mud in some real particular spots that are finding it difficult to adhere to it. But if I just am patient and I just press it, I don't want to rub too much like that. I'm just pressing it in. And as you see, this is all I'm going to do. I'm just cutting my lengths of my half width mesh, and I'm just putting it over the edge. And as you can see, there's a nice pattern on these walls, okay? But this definitely was a repair that needed to happen. Okay, so I'm going to pat that in there. Pat that in there and just cut the trim. And this little piece will work really nice right there. So now I take my next piece, and that's what I do. I just run it across there, cut it with my scissors, tap it in. Run it across, tap it in. Okay. Run it across, just take it as far as I can. Tap it in, make sure it adheres. So I'm gonna finish up doing this, and then I'll show you, I'll get my mud mixed up, and then I'll show you how we bed all of this, okay? So now what I've done is I stabilized everything. This is fine, everything is good, structurally fine. And I'll have Amber zoom in for us, and you can trace, and you can see what I did. I took the little half pieces of mesh, and I stabilized the edge all along the patch and the repair. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go mix my DuraBond, and we'll show you how I prep this wall so that we can get it painted. Okay, so I've got my mud mixed up. This is DuraBond 20. So all I really want to do is bed this in. That's all I really want to do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. I am going to put a heavier coat on it when I come back. But right now, that's all I want to do now. I want to try to make sure there's no big ridges, okay, when I do that. So all I'm doing is covering that little piece of mesh, and we're just going to stabilize that whole edge there. And then I wipe, not all of it off, but most of it. I just want to make sure I don't leave any ridges anywhere. Okay, so down here I'm going to do the same thing. Just a little bit of mud to cover all of the mesh tape. Be very careful around that box. If it's hot, you don't want to touch it with your knife because you get a good zinger there. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to keep working the same direction. Just going to put it on there, wipe most of it off. Okay, so that's basically all I'm going to do with that. And I think I'm gonna run some like this as well to try to. It won't smooth it off completely, but it'll get all that big groove issue out of the wall, because you can't see a lot of that. You see a little bit of it. Okay, so now I'm just going to wipe all that off. Make sure I don't have any big ridges. Okay, so I am going to put another coat on this, so any little imperfections or anything that we got going on there, I'll be able to sand out and kind of fix a little bit. So now I'm just going to make sure that I've got one nice coat of Durabond on all of that. Okay, and so that's all I'm going to do right now. Now we're going to let that dry, and how I'm going to do that is we're going to take our hair dryer and we're going to encourage it to dry a little bit faster, because I want to be done with this today. So I'm going to do that, and we're just going to run our hair dryer over this till it turns white, because when it turns white, that means it's dry. Okay, so let me get this done, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so now we're on to the next step. As you can see, it dried nice and white. I had Amber do the hair dryer with that. It only took a few minutes to get it nice and dry and set. There's a few little darker spots, but it's set fine, and I can put another coat on it. So I'm going to use my 8-inch knife, and I'm going to put a little wider coat. I'm going to feather it so I get rid of all the ridges. You don't want ridges. Okay, so I'm going to need to put another coat on or do some touch-ups on it, because I am going to have to leave some tool marks and some stuff that is going to need to be sanded down before I paint. But for the most part, I just try to work out the tool marks to the best of my ability. Sometimes you get a little air pockets going on in it. And I have one little stubborn spot there that seems to be a little difficult. Okay. So I'm going to leave that. There's a couple little spots I'm going to have to sand and touch up. And then there's just this one little spot here. I'm going to get it with my 6-inch knife. Get the edges feathered off. Little bitty speck of something in there. I'll get that out of there. Clean off the ridges. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing with this. We're going to put our blow dryer to that and dry that up so that we can accelerate the finish process. So we'll move on to do that. When we're done, I'm going to sand this down lightly, and then we're going to do some touch up, and then we'll be ready for paint. Okay, so we applied the hair dryer to the wet Durabond. It was Durabond 20. Again, it took about 10 minutes, but it's all dried out. A couple little dark spots because it's deeper, but it's ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to lightly scrape to get tool marks off. Okay, and because I was careful in my coating process, I don't have heavy tool marks, and there's not many ridges. But I'm just going to lightly apply the knife. I'm not putting very much pressure on it at all. And I'm just going to scrape down any tool marks. Okay, so I'm done with that. So now I'm just going to lightly sand the edges. So all I want to do is just lightly sand any ridge that's there. And I'm going to do the field. Just going to sand it. Just a little bit to clean it up. That way there's no big ridge towards the wall. Get a little bit of that. There we go. Just get those little ridges off, just the little edge. But it's nice and clean. And so with that being done, I'm going to mix up just a little bit of more Durabond. There are a couple little rough spots that I'm going to touch up, and then we'll be ready to paint. Okay, so now I want to test out a couple spots with my paint. I've got a little paint roller for rough or semi-rough surfaces, which this is. And I don't need to get a big roller, and I just have a little Worcester cup. That's what I'm using. So I'm just going to get a little bit. I'm thinking of putting some sand in this paint because the texture is so rough here on the wall, and that might help a little bit. But I'm just gonna put a little bit of paint on here, and it looks like that the texture, the lines in the wall are going to look okay. But I think I am going to go ahead and put a little sand in this paint. Now, what the sand is going to do is it's going to rough it up, and it's going to give it some extra texture. Okay. So we're going to mix that in real well. And I could actually put a little more in there. Mix that in nice with my roller. Okay, now let's see how this works. So we're just gonna Oh, and you can see the sand in it. So that helps considerably. And then because there's different textures here, and this is almost like a primer is what this really is. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and I think I'm going to commit to this. We're going to use this paint, and I'm just going to do this is the same color, by the way. So we're just going to put a nice primer on it. Then we're going to blow dry it, and we're going to get our final coat on it this afternoon. So the drywall, the Durabond does soak that paint up. So I'm going to go through a little bit just on this primer coat, but it's working good. And I'm not so concerned about direction because the pattern on the wall is a multiple direction as well. So that's not too much of a problem. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish up this primer coat, and we'll be back in a little bit to put another coat on it. Okay, so we're going to be ready to put another coat on. So let's get started. Load my roller up. Okay, and again, I'm not worried about direction because the pattern on the wall is definitely different. So I can go in different directions. Just make sure my edges are feathered into the paint up above, and the second coat of sand into my paint is helping a lot with the roughness of the wall because it just we want to match that the best we can, and that's doing pretty good actually. So filter that in a little bit the best we can. Kind of fade that into the existing paint. Get those ridges off of there. And that will dry nice and fade it into that, so you won't hardly even tell from a paint perspective that there was a patch. And if I want to, I can actually put a little paint on a brush. It's going to have the sand in it. And then I can do a little more swirl. Okay, just lightly. And that puts some brush lines in the paint, which kind of also match the wall that we're painting to. Filter those lines nice. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Now I got to get a little more paint in my bucket and add a little more sand. So we're going to apply a dryer to this again when we're done, and then we'll show you the finished product.